Now, part of what I mentioned at the front end was that when we go into a site, we establish what the baseline conditions are, and we have an M&B, or typically it's M&B related to energy, but in this case we've gone a little bit broader about verifying how the site was operating. So in the first case here, when we walked in, as we mentioned, they were operating with 5 crack units. Through the changes that we made in the COP program, we were able to set them up operating with 3 crack units, 2 different sequences, as Mark just reviewed, and that site was operating very well with 2 less units operating than what it had been previously. The original CFM, when we walked into the site, was 52,000 CFM. Through the changes that we made with the 3 crack units operating, we were able to bring it down to just under 32,000 CFM. So still a little bit higher than ideal, but a substantial improvement over what we were seeing previously. 2 other elements that we look at. First one we define as cooling efficiency, and that's the amount of power required to create 1 kilowatt of cooling. And in the original operation, it took 0.4 kilowatts of power to create 1 kilowatt of cooling. We were able to reduce that down to 0.3 kilowatts of power. Now, the other one that's even more effective or more important is what we call the cooling effectiveness. And essentially what that is, we define that as how much cooling is required to remove 1 kilowatt of heat. And Paul alluded to this earlier in our discussion about cooling capacity and how much cooling capacity do you really need on a site, or how much cooling capacity you really have. This can vary quite significantly. In this case, the original baseline was 1.2 kilowatts of cooling was required to remove 1 kilowatt of heat. And then as we made our changes, we were able to reduce that down to 0.8 kilowatts of cooling to remove 1 kilowatt of heat. And as we'll see, I think we cover that off in our summary. If you remember, the original cooling operating capacity was 210 kilowatts. When we were finished with this site, we were operating actually at 170 kilowatts of cooling capacity. So both of these KPIs, the 2 on the right, show a significant improvement was made with the cooling, and the fact that, as we talked about earlier, our objective of doing more with what you have on site, we were able to achieve that, and achieve that quite significantly.